I'll get started in just a minute, as soon as MicroStation finishes opening for me. Now we're getting there. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Eric Thomas, and this is deja vu, I guess. I retired from ODOT at the end of 2011, currently working with ODOT as a consultant with the CADD team. So I never expected to be in this position, but I'm enjoying it. It's been really good. I want to talk about OpenRoads, and before I get started, show of hands, how many of you know what OpenRoads is? Okay. I was assuming, for the most part, people would be new to OpenRoads. So a lot of this is aimed at more of an overview of exactly what is OpenRoads, and a lot of it's not going to be real deep. Got a lot of stuff to cover. Initially, we'd planned to have a Bentley person here to cover some OpenRoads basics this morning, and he wasn't able to make it due to scheduling conflicts. So I've absorbed some of the things I expected Bentley to cover. I've got way too many slides, and PowerPoint right after lunch is not a good combination. So I'm going to jump over to MicroStation for a second and just talk a little bit about a couple things. Then we'll go to PowerPoint and hit all the boring stuff, and then we'll come back to MicroStation. So what I've got is the same old ODOT training project, the DARC 185 project that's been used for years and years. And I've brought a few things into OpenRoads here, and I thought I'd just start with just showing you a few things, and then we'll do some PowerPoint stuff. So I'm in a file that has survey information reference, and I've got the corridor defined, and this is just a partial corridor. I haven't done the intersection here, and this is just a 2D file. So first thing I want to start off with is Mark mentioned earlier, OpenRoads is not a product. I think there's been some confusion on that. You do not install OpenRoads. OpenRoads is a technology that is embedded within the Bentley products. So the OpenRoads technology is in SS2 to some degree. SS2 has just the horizontal tools, basically. And then SS3 introduced a bunch more tools, and I'll leave some of that to the PowerPoint. But so I'm not really in OpenRoads. I'm just in MicroStation Geopack. And the OpenRoads tools are embedded in task navigation. So in my task list, there's a group of civil tools, and that's where I'm going to find the OpenRoads tools. It's also in tools. They're scattered throughout here. I never use these pull-downs to access tools, but you can find them there. You can dock tool palettes if you're into that and stuff. I've never been one to get too much into configuring my workspace because eventually my user preference file is going to get corrupt. I'm going to have to delete it, and then all my configurations are going to disappear anyway. So I've tended to use MicroStation out of the box. So I'm suffered through the task navigation menu and suffered through using that. I know some users are really resistant to that. But that's where you'll find the tools is in the task navigation menu. The other thing that OpenRoads interfaces a lot with is Project Explorer, and we've got Project Explorer docked over here on the right. So those two menus are something that you're going to interface with a lot with the OpenRoads tools, and we'll get a little more into that as I go through stuff throughout the day. Okay, so I've got already in here, some of the stuff. I've mentioned the survey. It's in its own model or its own design file, and it's referenced in. And I've got super elevation defined. It's in its own design file, and it's referenced in. And my alignment itself, my alignment is in its own file, and it's referenced in. So I'm using a lot of references. And I know some users get hung up on all these different files, and they get all this stuff in all these different files. You don't have to put all this stuff in different files. It can all be in as few files as you want, although ODOT does require a base map for survey and a base map for design information, and right-of-way is also a requirement in the CAD manual. So there's really only 3 different design files that are required. Everything else is just how do you want to work. So I've got it split up just because I can. On a small project, it may make sense to keep the center line and the super elevation and the corridor all in one file, but I've kind of split them up. So I'm actually in a 2D file here, and I'm working in 2D from the design part of OpenRoads, and I'm going to back up and talk about survey quite a bit this afternoon. And I've dropped in a template, and I've run the template, and I've run it up to my intersection, and then here I've dropped in a different template that doesn't have the side slope information, and I've picked up here and finished running the template throughout. So that's what these graphics are from the template drops and the corridor model itself. That's kind of what the stuff looks like in 2D. And MicroStation or Bentley, they manage the 3D model for you. So that's one thing that's kind of cool about the OpenRoads civil stuff is I'm working in 2D and the 3D model is generated for me on the fly. So if I do hit this 3D view, take a second to go over there. This isn't the fastest network connection in the world or the fastest laptop in the world. Mark, you need to request a better laptop. So here's the 3D model part, and it's the same stuff, but over here I can just, right command, down here somewhere, zoom in on that, rotate this guy around. So you can see the 3D model that's constructed from the various pieces. And again, the pieces are the center line, the profile, the super elevation, and the template. And of course, you know, I haven't got into rendering. I've never been a big rendering guy, but I can, you know, turn on some rendering and do it that way if I want. And see that. So just a real brief introduction to kind of where we're headed. Someone told me for a successful presentation, show them the end first. That's kind of what I'm doing. But there you can see, you know, some of the pavement layers from the template. And okay, so that's where we're headed. So, you know, back up, I'll go through some PowerPoints, talk about the survey information, and then talk about the corridor information. So now we go back here, and hopefully I don't lose you all after lunch with the PowerPoints. Okay, so go ahead. So OpenRoads, again, it's a technology. It's not a product. And if you look at the Bentley website, they describe OpenRoads. They say it's common technology embedded in En-ROADS, GeoPack, and MX Road. That's the 3 civil design software packages that Bentley owns, and it's the same technology in all 3 packages. So this is part of their merging of functionality for their civil product line. Eventually, all 3 products are coming together down this OpenRoads world here. And just what does it do? It expands the products. Basically, for 3D modeling integration is the most important thing we're interested in here. And I mentioned it's not a separate install. It is installed with Bentley Civil Products. So when you install GeoPack, you are installing the OpenRoads tools. And I mentioned that the horizontal geometry tools first appeared in SS2. So if you're currently running SS2, you will see those tools in the task navigation. You'll see the geometry or the horizontal alignment tools over there. SS3 in the first quarter of 2013 included OpenRoads tools and improvements, and it removed some software functions. So that's one thing to be aware of if you have not gone to SS3. When you install SS3, you will no longer have the corridor modeler and its related functionality. You will no longer have roadway designer. Site is removed, and cut cross-sections from a DTM file is removed. So those tools are no longer available in SS3. I have a bullet there. You can install SS2 and SS3 at the same time if you want. I have not done that. I don't know if Mark's done that. I think Jack has. I'm told you can. Have you done that, you guys? Yeah. I need to do that. Okay, there was a refresh to SS3 March 11th, and there's the version numbers. It just included more enhancements and fixes for OpenRoads. Mark McLeod mentioned Subsurface Utility Engineering, or SU, this morning. SU is included with that update. SU is a subset of SUDA. SUDA stands for Subsurface Utility Design and Analysis, which at this time is an unreleased product. But SU is the first part of that, and that's basically the modeling part, SUDA product, without the design and analysis, just more the 3D modeling of subsurface utilities. So that's included. Also includes MicroStation Descartes. And the thing to note here on your licensing, the SU and Descartes, they consume their own license. So even though they're installed with GeoPack, they don't use your GeoPack license. So if you go and activate the SU product, it's going to come up and tell you you are consuming a license, and however your billing is set up, it's between you and Bentley. But it's something to be aware of. Just because it's installed doesn't mean you're licensed to run it. And some of the way Bentley's licensing works, they may say, hey, you ran that, now you owe us for running that. So that's between you and Bentley. So in SS3, OpenRoads, the currently available tool sets, survey processing, terrain modeling, horizontal vertical alignment, super elevation, templates, corridor modeling, cross sections, and civil cells. So if you look at what was removed, corridor modeling, roadway designer, site modeler, and cutting cross sections from the DPM. This is what was removed, and then that's what OpenRoads functionality basically replaces what was removed. Okay, and we'll look at each of those pieces in some detail. Okay. OpenRoads does not currently include plan production tools. It is really at this point survey processing and modeling, creating a 3D model. The only plan production related tool is cutting cross sections from the model. Okay, so as far as plan and profile sheets or annotating stations and offsets and things like that, there are no new OpenRoads tools for that functionality. So for plan production, you're reverting back to GeoPack Road for plan production tools. So there's definitely a transition period here still happening between the products. Go ahead. The question is on the cross-section cutting. Does it still use the GeoPack cells, or can you still do it with GeoPack cells? Is that the heart of your... There is a sheet tool in OpenRoads. Well, the cross-section tool in OpenRoads can do two different things. It can do sheets. I would do that. And it can drop a GeoPack cell on the cross-sections. So you're cutting it from the model, and it's spacing them out. If you want to do that. And then you can still run GeoPack functions on those cross-sections with the cell if you needed to. I don't know why you do it, but you could. Okay. All right, so in OpenRoads, I'm going to use OpenRoads to store my alignments and profiles. But for plan profile sheet, I need a GeoPack centerline and a GeoPack profile out of the GPK. So when I store a centerline, I can go export it to a GPK. When I store a profile, I can go save it into GPK. And if I update that with OpenRoads tools, it should rewrite it to the GPK and keep them in sync. If I update it in GeoPack, if I go edit a chain using the GPK, Kogo tools, it doesn't go backwards. You would have to import it back into an OpenRoads alignment. So there's some things like that. So anyway, the main point is there's still a transition of tools. All the tools are not in place for plant production. And, an undetermined point in the future right now when that stuff will be integrated. There is an upcoming SS3 refreshed release. They initially had said the end of June for that, and it was delayed due to some business agreements. So I'm told it's sitting on Select, ready to be activated. They just had some business agreements they had to get finalized before it was totally released. So that's something that we should see in the next couple weeks, I would imagine. Any information on that, Kevin? You know when? Don't know. Okay. So we should see an update to SS3 here in, I assume, the next couple weeks. This update is another full install of MicroStation and Geopack. It's not a patch. So, and it's I have not seen a list of enhancements personally, so I don't know what all it includes, but I'm told the enhancements and fixes for OpenRoads and includes an update for MicroStation Descartes. So we should look for that to show up on Select in the next few weeks, I would assume. So where's Bentley headed with this? Well, at one time, Garrett Gray of Bentley made the statement that the next major release will remove En-ROADS, Geopack, and MX from the civil product line. I sent him an email last week and said, hey, I'm giving a presentation. Can I say that? And he said, well, ideally, the next major release will remove En-ROADS, Geopack, and MX from the civil product line. But I doubt that will happen. That was what Derek said. So the point is, at some point, those products will be retired. At some point, OpenRoads will become the civil design product for all the product lines. So when this happens, that release has not been set, and resistance is futile. So it's going to happen. Mark mentioned this morning the roadway designer training that ODOT had done a few years back, and that there's some roadway designer training resources on ODOT's website. Internally, ODOT never migrated to that, just didn't adopt it. So some of the resistance may be internal to ODOT, but resistance is futile. Okay. ODOT's implementation of OpenRoads. So jumping back to last fall was when I first came back in to ODOT. I was brought back in to help out with helping ODOT update to the OpenRoads technology and to the 3D modeling world. And when I came in, the first thing we have to look at is survey. That's where everything starts. It starts in the field or aerial mapping or however you get your survey. So we started by looking at the OpenRoads survey tools that are available and developed survey standards. In the winter, spring of 2014, I provided some training for ODOT surveyors. So all the surveyors in ODOT have gone through a 2-day OpenRoads survey training. There's a training guide. It's in these standards. Mark mentioned this morning it's not on the CADD website separately yet. Get that out there. But if you look in the standards that are downloaded near the OpenRoads stuff, you'll find the training guide in there. So this spring, summer, the districts have started to process topo data with OpenRoads. Not every district is doing that yet. I don't have a count of how many, but I've talked to some that are definitely starting to process their data using the OpenRoads tools instead of using Geopack survey. So as we continue through the summer and into the fall, more and more districts are going to start using those tools. The question is regarding coding, I guess. Does it change is what you want to know? Okay. And all right, so I have to repeat the question because I guess they're put the video on the website. So we have to start with something else if we're going to use OpenRoads as far as the coding and the field processes. It's still Geopack survey based to a large degree. Certainly there's some En-ROADS survey influence with it too, but The survey side of OpenRoads looks more like Geopack survey than it does inroads survey. The field codes are all the same. I probably have a slide for this as we get into survey. So the field codes are the same, and the collection methods, as far as I'm going to begin a line or end a line, those things are the same as you would have done with Geopack survey. So those things really don't change. The processing and how the data is formatted and the output changes, but the input is still going to be from, either raw coordinate data or GPS data or reduced coordinates that someone's reduced and given you a CSV file. So that's going to be pretty much the same. Okay, I want to mention versions. So the design personnel are, for the most part, still using SS2. For the most part. There's a few designers scattered throughout the state who've updated to SS3, but for the most part, ODOT has not gone to SS3 internally for design. Survey personnel are currently migrating to SS3. I mentioned some of the districts are now processing using OpenRoads. Some of them are still, I guess, getting the software installed or whatever. I'm not really involved in that. So looking ahead this fall, looking at putting out the first release of the OpenRoads stuff for design, for the civil stuff. And then moving into winter, spring, I'll be developing some training material for ODOT and training ODOT users. We'll probably get a couple districts to start piloting some projects in OpenRoads, that kind of thing. Tentative plans as far as training data is to integrate it into Bentley Learn. So in the past, there's a Geopack Road 1 and a Geopack Road 2 training guide that were written several years ago and have been updated through the years. And those are more or less comprehensive. You can start with those and kind of work through the project for the most part and not need anything else. As I look at it, I'm like, should we teach users how to place an alignment in OpenRoads? Here's the, line between 2 points command. Should we be teaching people line between 2 points and a fillet command? Or should we just say, go to Bentley Learn, watch a Bentley presentation on the basics, and let's supplement that with ODOT training for, okay, here's ODOT standards that you use with that. So that's kind of my current thought is supplementing what's available through Bentley rather than here's a comprehensive training thing for OpenRoads. Now, I know not everyone has a Bentley Learn license. How many people use or access Bentley Learn? And maybe a half, okay? So those of you who are not using Bentley Learn, is it you have access to it and just don't use it? Is that have access but I don't use it? Or I just don't have access? What's Bentley Learn? Okay. Within ODOT, every license has a Bentley Learn pass, so they can go into Bentley Learn and watch whatever videos they need. So that's the current thoughts. That doesn't mean that's the way it's going to go, but that's my current thoughts, and I've run that by Mark, and it seemed reasonable by Mark, too. So I don't know what that means for those of you who don't have Bentley Learn. That means you don't have access to it, and that's my concern. So that's why I brought that up here. I'll just let you know that's what we're currently thinking. Okay, I want to step back again. April 18th, a few months ago, the release included OpenRoads standards in a separate folder. Under ODOT standard, V8I standard, there's an OpenRoads folder. And this has caused a little confusion, and I'll take the blame for that. My initial contract with ODOT was basically a 6-month contract, and at the end of 6 months, here's OpenRoads survey stuff, and it's in this folder, and I'm out the door unless you bring me back in. So there was originally, the files were in that folder by themselves. It was more or less my deliverable. And there was a OpenRoads UCF, OpenRoads PCF pair that you could go pick from the pull down and run the OpenRoads standard. And my intent was that those were used with SS3 to gain access to the OpenRoads survey functions. That was my intent. And what kind of happened was we kind of migrated to, well, if you're on SS3, just use the ODOT OpenRoads workspace. ODOT had started, I don't remember what you called it, like a Bentley SS3. V8 ISS3. There was a V8 ISS3 user that ODOT had put out previously, and my intent was, well, if you're doing an OpenRoads survey, use this ODOT OpenRoads workspace, and that'll get you the survey stuff. It kind of, after the fact, kind of became, well, just use that one in SS3. And it's caused a few problems because there were some things I didn't test on the road side of things. It was intended for survey. So there were a few things that weren't quite functioning properly if you use that ODOT OpenRoads in SS3 just for everything. So I think we have all that cleaned up. There was an update that Jack and Greg put out yesterday that addressed an issue with title sheet map program that was related to the workspace. But moving forward, this morning Mark talked about ODOT CADD. All the stuff, he mentioned the DGN libraries all being integrated in one place. So that ODOT OpenRoads has some DGN libraries for OpenRoads survey. And there's DGN libraries for ODOT's levels that are just up in the other V8I standard DGN lib folder. So things were kind of segregated out. So part of the moving forward is to just get all that stuff integrated back into one directory structure. There's not a separate folder that has some OpenRoads stuff. It's all just one thing. So that's where Mark and the team are headed with the ODOT CADD stuff. And the decision was made, as Mark said, just to kind of rename it and kind of retool it. So that ODOT CADD structure that will be released this fall is intended to be used with SS3. I don't know that Mark specifically spelled that out, but it's not intended to be used with SS2. It is intended to be used with SS3 and forward. Okay, so just thought I'd drop back and mention that without OpenRoads stuff and the confusions it's caused, and hopefully we'll clean all that up. Take the blame for that. That was kind of my fault. All right, moving on. So that's this October. The intent is to get all that stuff in place, and then moving forward beyond that, that ODOT CADD is SS3. So it is my intent for the things that I'm helping ODOT with, and Jack, things that he covers. It's our intent just to kind of focus on SS3 and move forward, not really update the SS2 standards unless something's broken that we have to. So that's the intent moving forward, is just to kind of get that ODOT CADD out there for SS3, and that's where we're headed. ODOT V8I just kind of fades off into the sunset someday. Okay, so as far as GeoPack survey, OpenRoads survey, I say OpenRoads, and it's really GeoPack survey with OpenRoads technology. It's easier to say OpenRoads than it is to say GeoPack survey with OpenRoads technology. So when I say OpenRoads, I really mean GeoPack survey with OpenRoads technology. Okay, so interface changes. There's no longer a survey project. So that survey dialog where you create your survey project and put in your user, and you've got all those preferences to set up. You don't have that anymore. The tools are embedded in task navigation menu. I mentioned that, and it uses Project Explorer. So I briefly had those up just to say, hey, these two things are here. I've got them docked on each side, and that's how you're going to access the tools. There's a lot of context menus. Context menus pop up when you hover over or select an element. So if I select a survey point, I will have a context menu pop up with tools relative to a point. If I select a survey linear feature, or chain, if you want to call it that, a group of tools will pop up appropriate for a survey chain or linear feature. So I'll show you some of those. And they're starting to use a lot of on-screen prompts that are just, they float on the cursor, so you don't have to have a separate key-in window and access that. So just some interface changes there. Now, as far as the data with OpenRoads survey, the biggest change, everything is stored directly in a DGN file. Okay, the survey processing no longer uses the GPK file. Everything is stored in the DGN file. If you've processed survey data, you get 1 million files in your folder that it creates. You don't get all those reports that GeoPack survey created, none of that stuff. is populated out there for you. 3D files I have required for survey processing. Well, technically that's not true. You can process in 2D, but it is advisable to process in 3D. So that's a change. A lot of Geopack survey users were using 2D files. So Bentley definitely recommends 3D. There's some specific commands that only function in 3D that don't function in 2D. So surveys should be processed in a 3D model. It is now fully compatible with annotation scale. Hooray. No more of that annotation scale add command and processing more data, and some of it annotates and some of it doesn't. Okay, so it's fully integrated with annotation scale. And since it's in MicroStation, undo is supported. So if I delete a point, oops, I didn't mean to do that, I can just undo it. If I move a point, I didn't mean to move that, I can just undo it. There's also a little log file it creates that has a history of changes that were made to the file. So if someone goes in and deletes a point, theoretically that's written to the log file, and you'll see that this user deleted this point on this date at this time and all that. So there is a history of changes that's logged for you. Okay, terrain models are also stored in the DGN. There is not a separate TIN file, now just a design file element. Terrain models are shared by referencing. So I'm going to have some survey data, and if I want to read the terrain model to get a profile, I just reference that survey file, and I've got access to the terrain model. Graphic edits to the survey data or the mapping. The graphical edits update the mapping and the terrain. Okay, I didn't read that right. So if I graphically, with MicroStation command, go in and pick a survey point and move it, of course I've just updated the mapping by moving the point, but the terrain model is updated too. So that's good and bad. So if a user opens, when I gave the training to the ODOT surveyors, I had a user say, well, I'll open the survey file sometimes and go in and move point, move the graphic, because maybe there was a manhole right next to a power pole and the symbols overlap. So I'll just go nudge that manhole over, or move it over a little bit just so that it's clean, they don't overlap. I'm like, you can't do that. First of all, you shouldn't be allowed to do that. It's not your data. It's the surveyor's data. He owns that. Okay? You have no right to change that. I'm living in the idealist world here when I say that. But the second thing is the graphics are linked to the terrain model. And if it is a point that is included in the terrain and I move it, I just edited the terrain model whether I knew it or not. So that's a change there, that your graphical edits update not only the mapping but the terrain model. Now this terrain model can be exported to a Geopack 10 if you need it. So just a simple select it, there's an export to different, I think there's land XML, and inroads, MX roads, and a Geopack DTM. Okay, features. So Larry asked a little bit about features. He said, do the features change? The feature management changed, but the actual features do not change. So by features, I mean field code. So ODOT's code list is on the website, and if you're lucky, when you scope a survey consultant, sub-consultant, you get data using ODOT's codes, if you're lucky. Usually you get whatever codes they used, and then you've got to, I got a few people agreeing, you've got to sort through it and do a find and replace if they send you like an ASCII reduced coordinate file or something. All right, so the codes are technically still defined in ODOT.SMD, but the software doesn't read ODOT.SMD directly. The software reads a DGN lib that says, here's the code name, go get its values from ODOT.SMD. So the DGN library is really just kind of, right now in this release, a pointer to the SMD. The SMD still defines, like for a code, TP is telephone pole, so that defines what cell is placed and what level it goes to and whether it's included as part of the DTM or not. So ODOT.SMD still controls that, but it's via the DGN library. This DGN library is also used to define some project settings in survey. I'll pull some of those up a little bit later. I also have a ODOT features for terrain model DGN library, and that defines the display features and element templates for the terrain model display. So I'll just show you that, get into it. Of course, the survey processing supports multiple data types and formats, so I just listed a few there. It's a pretty extensive list. I don't think you're going to run into anything that's not supported. I'm not an expert in that area, and I'm sure if there was something that was needed, Bentley would be very willing to add that. When you're importing data, there is a customizable text import wizard. So if you get reduced coordinate files in different formats, that allows you to define, what is this format I'm importing? Is it comma delimited? Is the first column the point name? Is the second column northing or easting or whatever? So there's a text import wizard that allows you to easily import, ASCII import from different formats. And another thing in the interface, there's some drag and drop data processing. So if I just take a data file and drag it over and drop it in MicroStation, it just says, oh, this is a CSV file, so I need to go process it as a CSV, and it just does it. So some of the file types are recognized and processed, the drag and drop function. Okay, geographic coordinate systems. This is going to be a big change that's going to impact survey and design both. A geographic coordinate system is used to establish the position of my data on the Earth's surface. So Ohio uses two geographic coordinate systems, a north zone and south zone, north zone and south. These are managed through Bentley Map. Bentley Map is installed with the software, but a geographic coordinate system, once it's defined, which basically just saying, okay, this data resides in this system. And once it's defined, that allows MicroStation to integrate with other applications that use georeference data. So it allows for integration with Google Earth or Bing Maps or the OSIP imagery or LiDAR mapping and whatever else. And there are standard geographic coordinate system definitions included with Bentley Maps. So that Ohio North NAD 83 is in there. Ohio North NAD 83 2011 adjustment is in there. NAD 27, it's all in there. So we're going to recommend that you start using geographic coordinate systems, and I'll show you how some of that works. It also allows for custom geographic coordinate system definitions. So if my survey data is mapped using grid coordinates, so it's on Ohio North, and I need to convert that to a ground coordinate. I need the scale factor. I need the combined scale factor from the survey company in order to do that. And if I have that combined scale factor, I can make a custom geographic coordinate system to facilitate moving it from grid to ground or wherever I need it. So that's something else that I'm going to demo a little bit. I say ODOT GCS recommendations. Well, it's maybe Eric's GCS recommendations. I'm going to recommend that you map the data to the appropriate state plane zone. So if you're in south zone, map it to the south zone on the grid, not ground coordinates. So if you scope a survey subconsultant, that's something to say this is what we want. If they can't provide it, I suggest getting a different survey subconsultant. That's easy to say, I know. I'm living in the world here. But I'm going to suggest that you want data on the state plane zone because everything you integrate with, at least I know where it's coming from. And then and the other thing you want is you want that scale factor for the grid-to-ground conversion. So you can make the custom and you can put it on whichever system you want just by picking the system. Okay, and then the last step of that, this impacts the designers too. and how they're working with the data. So when they create new files, they're going to need to define a geographic coordinate system. So I'm suggesting make a seed file for the project with that geographic coordinate system defined. I'll leave it at that for now. We'll talk about it again when I get into MicroStation. Another OpenRoads survey feature allows you to attach media files to a survey point, so you can attach images or videos to a survey point. You can just click on it and view it. So if there's something in the field that they take a picture of and associate with the point, you can view it directly in the file. I didn't get one of those. Okay, everything's stored in the DGN, right? There's some data integrity concerns. I mentioned one. The user in District 1 that wanted to go move points around, all right? He can't do that, editing the terrain model, right? So there's some data integrity concerns here. I suggested you could lock elements design file. There's a lock command in MicroStation. Selection set, select them, and then go, I think it's element lock, what it is. Whatever selected is locked. It's not foolproof because I can go select everything and go element unlock. Okay? That's one potential solution. Another, there's something called survey processing rules that can be enabled or disabled. So when I pick a point, survey point, and move it, it's executing a survey processing rule. And the rule on that point is, hey, this one is included in the DTM as a spot, so I need to go update the DTM. I'll process that rule. If I disable the rules and I move the point, it no longer will update the DTM. So that seems like a logical solution. I just disable, once I'm done processing survey data, I disable rules, and if someone needs to tweak it a little bit, it does. But if I need to process more data later, add additional data to the survey, I'm going to need to turn that back on. And as soon as I turn that on, it says, oh, this point's over here now. Update the DTM to, so the disable processing rules isn't really a good solution. And the last data integrity, the last possible solution is using Windows permissions to set who can access the file, who has read and who has modify access to the file. Go ahead, Chris. Sure. So the questions on geographic coordinate systems, if you've already mapped the data to ground and you got pick up additional data, does it have to be on the ground, the new data? The way the geographic coordinate system works is when you initially assign it, you're saying this is where the data lives. So it could already have been on, converted to ground coordinates. And when you initially assign it, you have to make a custom that says here's the scale factor, and then you would assign it and say, okay, it's on this custom system. It's on the ground. And once you establish where it's at, you can change it to any other system, and MicroStation will transform it for you. So whether I initially establish it as being on ground or initially it's on the grid, it doesn't matter as long as it's correct. But once it's established, I can go in that list, and I could go pick, whatever, a Montana zone, and it'll convert it to that zone. It doesn't matter. So it is telling the data where it resides, and you can go in and just pick a different one, and it'll transition it to that location. So in your case, if you'd surveyed on the grid, and you converted it to ground and brought in ground coordinates, well, what you could do is survey on the grid, bring it in on the grid, and assign it Ohio North, NAD 83 or whatever. And then it knows that's where it lives. And then if you make the custom, then you'd go pick the custom one, and it would transition it to ground coordinates. And then when you get your new data, since you've told it it's now on ground coordinates, it'll just bring in, even if it's on the grid, you tell it, I'm bringing in grid, and here's the MicroStation system it's on, and it knows how to integrate those. Yes, right. if you look at the training guide that's out there, there's a few pages that I put frequently asked questions, and like, what if I have this? What if I have that? So it's probably not comprehensive because it's just me sitting there thinking up scenarios that people are probably going to ask. So it covers some of those scenarios and gives you some guidance on how you want to handle that. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, I've got all these different potential files in MicroStation that come from different sources, and is there something in MicroStation to help me organize those? Part of Project Explorer has some file management stuff. I have not looked into that extensively myself, so that's one potential area. Mark, if you've looked at the files part of Project Explorer, that's a potential solution to managing some of the files or finding information. Yeah, that's not quite what he's asking, though, but yeah. Yeah, like a navigator. Yeah, Project Explorer is intended to handle some of that stuff. I just haven't got into it yet, so I don't have a good answer as far as Project Explorer. Now, you did hit a little bit on an issue is, file names and organization and structure and stuff. So, yeah, it's hard to manage, but I will throw out there's a published or a recommended standard in ODOT's thing. So if I've got a survey base map and I have additional survey, I mean, it could be brought into a separate file, and I have a BE001, BE002, BE003. I mean, but sometimes you're getting files named something from someone else that are not. I don't have a great answer for you. I'll have to look into Project Explorer's file settings and see what's there. I haven't really explored that. Okay, last data integrity concern. The Geopack and 10 files, if I export data to the GPK or export a terrain model to a TIN, it's just an export, it's done. So I've got this isolated file out there, I've got Geopack GPK. If the 10 model is updated with additional survey, I've got to generate a new 10. It's not dynamically linked in any way. So that's something else to be aware of. Any edits you make to the data in the design file afterwards require an update of the GPK or update of the 10 file. Okay, I mentioned there's an ODOT guide. It's in the CADD standards. That's where it's at in the CADD standards, just under OpenRoads training guides. You'll see that. I think Mark and Greg's going to put the file out there on the downloads page with the other training guide stuff. That uses that ODOT OpenRoads UCF PCF pair. There's a VBA to install the training files to your C drive. I'm kind of revising that stuff, changing the way a lot of that works, moving down the road. So, but what's out there now should get you going. Okay, enough with that. Let's get into it. All right. Unfortunately, we will return to the PowerPoint. Okay. So I'm going to jump back over to MicroStation, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about survey specifically in MicroStation, and I'm going to process a couple data sets. Maybe. Okay, I'm going to close this. Now, I'm not using the ODOT OpenRoads user and project pair. I'm using a training workspace. Just said I'm changing some of the way that stuff's set up for the training. And this is where I'm headed, is a separate training workspace that is used only for training files. So I'm in that. And one of the other things that is different here is I have multiple projects instead of just one project. ODOT has traditionally not used the MicroStation PCF file, project configuration file. ODOT has traditionally used the PCF really as a site configuration. So in the past, you always saw ODOT V8I, ODOT V8I, if you used an ODOT installation and followed what ODOT did. I know some firms, particularly larger firms with good IT support, have set up their own way of doing it. But internally, we're going to transition ODOT to a user, which would be ODOT 2014, I think is what it is, or something like that. And then we are going to transition ODOT to using a PCF, a true PCF file. So there will be a site configuration file that Mark mentioned this morning. The site configuration file will define all the variables that are relative to ODOT. The project configuration file will only define variables specific to a specific project. So there's a couple things with OpenRoads that are defined by configuration variable that will vary from project to project. So that's the need really to move to a PCF for ODOT is because of those things. And I know configuration stuff may not be your specialty, but just briefly I'll pull it up. So in this training workspace, so there's a projects folder, and there's all the PCFs. So I'm going to open, I think, this one first. So that's all that's in there. There's a few things that are specific to the project. So project data defines where the project lives. We talk about geocoordinate user library. So I mentioned a geographic coordinate system can be customized for that grid-to-ground conversion. That is, customization happens in a .bty file. That will be unique for every project. So that's one of the things that will be defined on a project level is a custom geographic coordinate system for grid-to-ground conversion. Another thing that will be defined uniquely, possibly, is a template library. So I'm pointing to one specific for the project there. And another thing that I mentioned, you may elect to make seed files specifically for the project that contain that grid-to-ground conversion thing. So that's another thing that could be project specific. So ODOT will transition to using a PCF file because some of these things are unique to each project. Again, the way ODOT was using the PCF file in the past did not facilitate that. So it's a little sidebar, and I know a lot of you aren't in configuration, but okay. All right, so what am I going to do first? I'm going to go to this project 80127, which was in Lorain County, and under survey base maps, I have an empty file created. So I basically the survey training data set that we've got for the OpenRoads survey class has these files already laid out. Some of them, most of them, I think, are already laid out. You don't actually create the files. And we'll wait for that to open. I don't know any jokes. Yes? But I don't know what that is. Not to ignore your question, but let me see what I want to get out of this. I know what I did wrong. Okay, so the question is LiDAR data with the insane amount of points, and everything is now stored in GPK, or DGN. Have I noticed any issues with the size of the data and processing? If it does that again, we may have a short break. What I've done with LiDAR points is flipped it to only the area that I need. So I haven't brought in the whole thing. Mark's probably done some. That's what I'd done. I had one that I was playing with that had 2 tiles. The project overlapped 2 tiles, so I had to bring in 2 tiles, and then I just clipped out what I wanted to make it smaller. So I didn't need the whole area. I don't remember off the top of my head like what the file size was before and after, and but yeah, definitely that's a concern with that many points. Yeah. The question is, why did Bentley put everything in the DGN? I guess it goes a lot of different directions here. I mean, one of the things Geopack users have asked for years is undo in the GPK. And there's no undo in the GPK. So by putting geometry in the design file, I can just use MicroStation to undo. Everything's got to go to a common format. So we're coming from MX Road, InRoads, and Geopack, which all have different terrain model formats. And all their terrains, like the InRoads DTM was what it contained was very different than what Geopack TNIN contained. So moving to a common format, they just elected to use the DGN as the common format rather than a separate binary file that sits out there. So there's the obvious things with if I need to update it, it's all linked directly. It's all in the file. Moving the point updates the terrain. So I think really just a combination of things. They just made a business decision to go that way. Okay, so I've got a blank file here, and I'm in a 3D model. Hopefully, yes, I am. And I'm going to bring in some survey data. So on the right, I have Project Explorer, and it's not configured the way I expected to see it. Got all my reading my network. Going to run into some problems here. Doesn't. Sure. No, that's okay. Your install shouldn't have screwed me up because I'm pointing to the network drive there. Now I checked it this morning and it was fine. Typical demos. Something unexpected always goes wrong. All right, I'm just going to roll with it and see what happens to me. It's probably going to cause me lots of problems. And I may just abandon this training workspace if I have to. Yeah, it's definitely doing some funky stuff to me. Now I don't have my task navigation. Okay. All right, we're going to see what this is going to do to me. And now this is back the way I expected to see it. All right. And now I've got all my levels. All right, everything looks good. I don't know what happened before. All we did was open MicroStation with the same workspace. Okay, so in Project Explorer, there's different groups, different panels. And I'm going to go ahead and just bring in some surveys. So I'm going to go to the survey panel, and it's showing me my current model. It's named Design. If I expand that, I have what's called a field book. Field book is going to contain my survey information. So I will import a data set into a field book. So if I have multiple data sets, I can import them into multiple data sets into the same field book, or I can make separate field books if I need to. And there's reasons to do each. It's going to go ahead and create a new one. And it's named Field Book 1 by default. And if I want to, I can change it to a different name, call it the topo. All right, call it topo survey. So I've got a field book, and what I want to do is load a file into the field book. And I mentioned, support of different formats. So there's some of the formats that are supported there. And this list has been filtered to show the formats that ODOT uses. So there are more formats than what's shown there available. And in your survey settings, you can configure that. So I'm going to bring in, this first one is Trimble DC file. It's under my survey raw data folder. Go ahead and bring that in. And when I pick the file, you should see a progress bar start up here. Boom, there it goes. Okay, and so there's some data, and I see some things I didn't expect, but that's all right. The demo. So this should look familiar to a GeoPack survey user, using the ODOT SMD for how things are visualized. So there's a random elevation shot, X field code, the point name, and the elevation. So that should all look familiar. That's an occupation line that was surveyed, project, and whatnot. So everything is processed directly in the DGM file, including the terrain model. So if I float my cursor, it tells me that's a terrain model named all field books. Level's default. I'm not sure why it ended up there, but now if I select that terrain model, I get a pop-up menu. So I mentioned some pop-up menus that are context sensitive. So those are the tools relative to a terrain model. So one of the things is its properties. Set that as the active terrain model. There's an export to MXRoad, InRoads, GeoPack, or LandXML. That one is a reprocess or update it from its source information and delete it. So if I look at the properties, no feature definition. That's why it's all white. Okay, a feature definition is used to define how things are displayed. Feature definitions are something that you will need configured or you will need to configure yourself in order to use OpenRoads. So that's a lot of what I've been doing is defining features for OpenRoads. Features are, I'll leave it at that. Okay, so there's some features, and when I drop down, I have some features for terrain models. So there's some existing ones. One of them is X_boundary. So if I pick that, that changes the display of that terrain model to only show me the external boundary. Okay, and then there's some different ones there that I've configured. Maybe I do want the triangles, so I'll use this X_triangles. And there's the, since no feature was defined before, that's why it was all white. All right. Now, these are still graphics just drawn on a level. So I could still come to microstation levels and come down here and find that DT triangles, wherever that's at. Turn them off that way if I want to do it that way. So it's still microstation graphics, just how they're controlled is a little different by feature. Okay, so there's some features that I've set up for contours at different contour intervals and things like that. And as we move forward into this and you guys start to look at it more, that's where you can come back and say, hey, you know, it'd be useful if there was a feature for this or that. You can add your own features, or, you know, we'd prefer that you contact us and we put it in there so everyone has access to it. Yes? So the question is, feature display can only be one feature at a time. There are some overrides, so if I reference this in the file that I've got it, you know, that I reference it to, I can't override the display there. I have to look and see how much control you have off the top of my head. Another thing I'll mention at this release, see, the contours weren't working for me yesterday, and I didn't have time to diagnose, and it doesn't. So I have something wrong with my contour feature, so it's not going to display. In this release, the contours, the annotation of the elevation is dynamic, and it moves based on your zoom extents. So you don't really know where that annotation is, so it's just a display. So I view the features in this release as more of just showing me what's there. But if I needed to display contours in this release, I'd go through the trouble of exporting it to a Geopack 10, display the contours using the DTM preferences. That's what I would do, just because of the way the text on the contours is handled release. But it is one feature assigned in this file at a time. There's no context-related features that, well, I shouldn't say there's no context-related features, because there is, but there are not context-related features for, like, if my annotation scale is 10, then show it this way. If my annotation scale is 20, then show it that way. They don't support that at this point in time. I think that type of thing is planned at some point, but it's not there. Okay, so there's just, you know, a quick overview of bringing in some survey stuff. It was just a Trimble DC file, and I just brought it in. A couple of things I want to do while I'm in here. It is annotation scale aware, so if I change my annotation scale of 1 to 10, you should see that text resize, and it did. Change it back to 20 and go back up. So the same thing with any symbols, guardrail lines, fence lines, all that stuff. The annotations themselves, again, they're all on levels. I can turn off that level. Over here on the left under the tools, there's a survey group of tools, and I'm not going to go through all these tools, but one of the ones that's kind of nice is just turn off the annotations, so you can just toggle them all off. See them. Let me change my feature display. Well, I'm going to leave it that way for now. One to mention the editing. So if I just grab this point and move it, see the triangles update. So that's what I was talking about earlier, that they're linked. Graphics are linked with the terrain. So that the random elevation shot is included as a spot elevation in the terrain model. Moving it says, okay, I have to triangulate over here now. Mentioned undo, so I just undo those two, and I'm back to where I was. So there's part of the DGN integration is to enable those types of things that otherwise you couldn't do. I mentioned survey processing rules, and that happens, I believe, on the model. Yeah, there's a deactivate survey processing rules. So if I turn that on and move that X, that it will move without updating the terrain. So I don't know if that's a good solution or not, but that's available. If I turn that off, and move the point, terrain should stay where it was. Yep. It's just disconnected from the terrain. Well, I had that user in District 1 that wanted to go in and nudge that over so his graphics didn't overlap, you know. But watch what happens as soon as I activate the processing rules. So it goes through the elements and says, oh, that point's here now, so I have to triangulate to there. So I don't like it. But that's the way it works. Undo, oh, and okay. Okay, the data itself, since it's in the file, if I want to see this stuff, okay, over here in Project Explorer, my survey tree, if I look at that field book, topo survey, and expand that, so there's the data file I imported. Under that data file, I have different things. So there's the point features. So here's all the point features that are in that data file. And that's the same old ODOT code list that's been out there for years, okay, read from the SMD file. So if I click on a particular code, let's maybe look at the dead man. There is a show details dialog. So show me details about that feature. If I click on show details, I can see that they surveyed 2 DM points in the file and the properties of those points. These can be edited here. They can be edited individually. They can be edited by selecting them in groups. If I right-click, there's a list of editing commands. I'm not going to go through all that stuff. If I pick a linear feature like center of pavement, see, these are all the shots that were coded with center of pavement. First one, its linking code was start a line. Next one, there's a linking code, so next keeps connecting until it either gets to an end or another start. So there's another start. They didn't actually code an ending point in this data set. They just coded another start, so the previous one ended. So just a quick overview of some of the capability of analyzing and editing data. Now, this was a Trimble DC file, but it was reduced coordinates, so there's no observation data for this one. I've got another one later that is raw data observations that I'll bring up. Yes? I didn't quite hear you. Okay, so questions on editing linear features. Let's see if I got something here. Change this. And clean up some screen. And again, I could have just turned off the level. So, you know, just like Geopack survey, they're going through a series of points. And you know, on that, there's something that is different here is there are different types of linear features. Geopack survey, a survey chain was a survey chain. Survey chain was composed of, it could be composed of points of different feature. And I could go insert a different feature and make it a chain. They didn't all have to be the same feature. In OpenRoads survey, there are 3 different types of linear features. Right? One is a graphic linear feature. Graphic linear feature would just be something I draw in MicroStation and say, import this into the train model. So I could come in here and just draw a 3D line string and say, take it into the train model as a break line. So that's a graphic linear feature. One is a dynamic link linear feature. Second type is a dynamic link. A dynamic link means these are connected, they're all the same feature code, and they're connected in the order that they're collected. And they're linked dynamically by the software. So, for example, this feature is, let me turn back on the display. This is a D for a ditch line. Set my text size smaller here, or my annotation scale. Okay. So I'm just going to pick this point that I can get. And in the point properties, I'm going to change it to an X, just because I can. Did not do what I expected. I thought, oh, you're right. Thank you. Yep, because there's the little. I would have looked at that for a while. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay, let's do that again. So I'm going to pick this point. Hold, that's one thing they're going to update when you're selecting, that it won't get the text, it'll get the feature for you. So, have you looked at that in the update yet? Kevin, they do that? Good. Okay, so I'm going to change this to an X. And because this is a dynamic link linear feature, it says, oh, X is not same field code, so I'm not going to include it. So it dynamically readjusted that chain. I haven't answered your question yet. I'm getting there. So that's the second feature type, is a dynamic link linear feature. They all have to be the same code, and they're connected in the order that they're shot. Okay, the third type is a point list. Thank you. I knew it was point something. A point list linear feature. And a point list linear feature is what is most similar to a geopack survey chain. A point list can be chained together in any order with any feature code. So if I want to make this a point list chain under selected, I have to convert it to a point list feature. Now that it's converted to a point list feature, and in the ODOT standards, we made the dynamic chain the default. Now that it's a point list, when I select it, I have a little different tool set. I didn't talk about what tools popped up, but I've got the typical stuff you'd want. Move a point, slide it along it, insert a point, different things. But I can look at that point list here, manage the point list. So there's all the points that made up that chain. And if I wanted to delete one out, insert one, those functions are here to do that type of stuff. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that at least gets you exposed to some of the editing tools. Does that kind of get what you wanted to? Sorry. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I'd make this question was if you shot this one linear feature from two setups, basically, one going in one direction, one going in the other direction. I would make sure they're two separate chains, and then here there's a join linear features. I believe you have to convert it to a point list before you can join it. So if it's a dynamic, I believe you cannot connect it. It has to be converted to a point list to connect it. 95% sure of that. Yes. Yeah, to summarize what you said, the dynamics is really almost as is, and converted to a point list is where a lot of your editing. There's still some editing in dynamic as far as taking a point out, and I didn't have to change a feature code to remove it from the thing, but you gain additional tools in the point list linear feature. Okay, we had a couple other. Yes, double coding still supported. I don't know. If I delete, okay, so if I turn off, I'd have to experiment with that. I'd have to test that. So if I turn off the processing rules, delete it, turn it back on, does it recreate it? Okay, yeah, the terrain model itself was restore it from the source data. Yeah, I haven't tested that specific scenario, so I can't answer. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't tested that specific scenario, so I can't quite answer that. Yeah, I got your question. Okay. All right, moving on. Wow. Okay. I'm not going to answer your questions anyway. All right, I'm going to jump to, I'm going to skip a couple data sets that I had planned to look at. I'm going to close this file, and I'm going to jump to this one. That's the one I want? Yeah. Okay, I want to bring in one that has two data files. And this was also a bridge survey. So I want to talk about terrain models and how they're created. So that first one, you notice the terrain model, if you remember, the name of the terrain model was all field books. And I had one field book with one data file, so that's fine. Well, I've got two data files on this one. One's the topo that happens under the bridge, and then one is just the bridge deck itself. And I don't want all this to go to one terrain model. I want that bridge deck separated out. So before I process, I'm going to go into the survey settings and tell it not to automatically create terrain models for me. Otherwise, it's just going to take all the data from all the field books and keep adding it to the terrain model for every data set that I import. So MicroStation opens here over the network and the wireless. And okay. So before I process, I'm going to look at civil standards, and I haven't talked about this. There's a libraries tab that's ghosted. So these are all the different setup files that are configured in the OpenRoads environment here. And one of these, well, let me look at two things. There's feature definitions. I'm going to expand this out. And under feature definitions, you can see some different DGN libraries. So I don't know how readable that is in the back of the room, but there's 4 DGN libraries here that are attached with feature definition. One of them is ODOT Features Survey. ODOT Features Survey, I mentioned that in the PowerPoint that's what references ODOT SMD, and that's where the field codes are listed here. So actually, if you look at the actual code names here, these aren't really the code names. This is the feature name. Feature gets the code from the SMD, and I prepended it with survey for all these. I did that specifically just in case there was a duplicate name between existing and proposed stuff. Like, maybe there's a proposed CBR in the catch basin stuff. So feature itself is prepended with the name survey. So anyway, this is a library of features that is ghosted because it's read from the configuration. Edit those. I'll leave it at that. And under project settings, there are some survey settings here. All right. And if I bring this up briefly, if I look at its properties, these are just some default things I configured. And for example, under linking codes, there's that PL asterisk, OC asterisk, CL asterisk, the 5 codes that ODOT uses for linking their numeric equivalents. So, that's what the survey settings defines, is some different things about how the data is processed. For example, I'm hearing from some of the districts that if they put the feature code, it's the mapping code after the feature code, the Trimble Business Center stuff will do all the line work. So traditionally, ODOT has put BL asterisk space code name. So now some of the districts are doing code name space, then the mapping feature after it. So that's something that can be changed in here. Where is the mapping code? Is it before the feature code or is it after the feature code? Well, right now it's set before in the ODOT. That's another example of something that can be changed. So anyway, these settings are read from a DGN library. What I'm going to do is copy these settings into my current file, product settings survey, and paste them in there. I'm going to rename that, and this is PIN number 16653. So I'm just going to call this 16653 settings. And if I look at the properties, under train model, I'm going to tell it, there's the default name for train models, all field books, create train models true. I'm going to tell it make that false. So it will not automatically create a train model. Now I'm going to import some data. This is all in the ODOT's training guide. Under survey, my design model, field books, I'll create a new field book. I will use those settings I copied. And in that field book, I'm going to load in a file. And this one is an SDR format. For survey, for raw data, I have two files. I'm going to bring in that one first. Processes. There it goes. Okay, so there's some topo. And you can see I don't have a train model. Hold it, don't create them. Create train model is false. And I'm going to bring in a second one. So under field books, I'm going to load another file, and I'm going to bring in the bridge deck survey. So they did this as two separate pieces, and there's the bridge deck piece. One of the things that's kind of nice is under data files, I can turn them off, see what's in one individually. So that's all they did on the bridge deck. That off on the topo, all the topo. So now I've got this stuff. Well, I did that wrong. I want two separate field books. I don't want them both in the same field book because now I'm going to just delete that one. Make a second field book. So I have field book 2. Now I will load the bridge deck into a separate field book. So I cannot create a train model from a data set. I create a train model from a field book, so that was my mistake there. All right. So on this first one, I will tell it create train model. That is the underlying topo. I'll go ahead and change the feature to use the triangles. Okay. Off. Train's still going to display. And the second one, okay, this is not a feature that is included in the DTM by default. So on this feature, since I want to make a DTM from that perimeter of the bridge deck they surveyed, I'm going to click it under its properties. Instead of telling it the terrain is determined by the DTM, I'm going to tell it this is a break line. And then I'll create a terrain model for that. Separate terrain model, and I will change its feature. Oops, I got the break line. Get the right one here. There we go. I have a feature specifically for a bridge deck. So these are two separate train models using two separate features to display them. I'm going to go ahead and throw that into the illustration mode. Rotate that around. So you can see the bridge deck and the train underneath, separate pieces there. So that, again, that data set is in the ODOT training stuff, and that's just an example there of two different data sets in two different field books and then making a train model from each field book. Go ahead. The profile is a bit of an issue on that. because when I cut a profile, it is from the active terrain model. So I'd have to set one of these terrain models active. So I would cut it along this ground model, and we're going to see it do that. Okay. Kevin, have you cut profile? You can't pick more than one terrain model, right? It's just one terrain model. That's what I thought. So I'm just going to have to pick the topo terrain model, and you're just going to see it go down like that. Now, when I make my proposed profile, I can do that, obviously. Go across there. Yeah, you could potentially do that. Yeah, that's one I probably should ask Bentley that question for this scenario. Just send him this data set. Well, as soon as I merge them, this is going to triangulate up to the top one, so I lose that bottom. That's why they're two separate pieces. Okay, and with GeoPack clipping profiles, you can do it across multiple surfaces. Thinking terrain models. Looked at GeoPack functions for 3 years. Go ahead. Yeah, the problem with OpenRoads is the way profiles are cut in OpenRoads is totally different. So it's a totally different procedure. I mean, we're already 10 after 2, and I was going to get into all that too. So we'll see how far I get with that. But when you cut a profile of OpenRoads, you're saying this is the terrain model to use, and that's it. And it's not even, all right, we'll leave it at that. Okay. Another one? Okay. I have not talked to them about cutting across a profile across multiple surfaces. I have not talked to them about that. I am going to now, and I'm going to send them this data set as a simple example because it's a pretty small data set. Nice little thing for them to test with. Okay, I do want to talk about some road functions, and we also need to talk about geographic coordinate systems. Let me go back to the top view here, get this data. There's some GPS points out there that they brought in. Okay, so I got this data, and it was mapped using grid coordinates. So it is on the grid. Now, I have not defined a coordinate system in this file. Okay, so if I look under Tools, okay, before I do this, go to Applications Map, Activate Map. All right, and that's going to take seconds to activate. If you're like John this morning, he can't wait 2 minutes without telling you it's going to take 2 minutes. Bentley didn't do that. This could take 2 minutes. I'm just laughing. It's somewhat generational. The younger guys got to have it now, Okay, so map is activating. And map's kind of funny that it activates, and once it's activated, there are no new commands. You don't see, there's no Bentley map pull down, it's just, now it's active. And even under the pull down menu, once it's done, it no longer says activate map. It just totally disappears. So there's nothing to tell you that it's activated other than when it's done. For what it's doing to me. Okay, I hadn't seen that. I do not pretend to be an expert with Bentley Map. Okay, I don't know what's going on here because I do have a... Should I close MicroStation and try it again? Why not? I think I told it was demo. Yep. All right, it was still trying to do something. I shouldn't have closed it. I got impatient. John's not the only one. And I probably got all kinds of hanging processes and stuff. And see what I got going here. I don't see microstation or geopack in the list, so. All right, one more time. I did want to get into some design road-related stuff. I kind of figured it would be hard to get through everything I'd planned. But I do want to talk about geographic coordinate systems a little bit. Hopefully it'll function for me. Honestly, I ran this yesterday and it blew up on me. We'll see what it does today. Okay, so this time I'll activate map, and I will be patient. It looks like it's doing something. Okay, so I have this data, I have map activated. So if I go to Tools, Geographic, select Geographic Coordinate System. Actually, this one I do have the south zone already defined. So I had used a seed file that defined OH83 South State Plain Zone. So that's something else you'll see in the OpenRoads standards. You'll see new seed files that have north and south zones already defined. Now, obviously there's more zones than that. So if I go in here to select a system from the library, there is the list of different coordinate systems that are available for Ohio. There's quite a few. That's the active, the NAD 83. Okay, so if I want to put this on ground coordinates, I'm going to copy this system, and with the project configuration that I have running, I see a folder for custom. Again, and I'll paste that in there. So where that came from was my project configuration. I had that open earlier, which one am I in? 16653. So in there, GeoCoordinate user library equals to the project data survey GCS folder. There's a custom DTY file. So there's information on where you get that from and all that stuff in the training guide. So I've got this custom file that I can define coordinate system and assign, and that's what gives me in map the ability to copy one in and edit it. So this is in the south zone, but converted to ground coordinates. If I right-click on this, I can edit coordinate system properties. I have a copy of that south zone, and I would recommend giving it a name relative to the project, and is that Madison County? I'll just say add 16653. Good luck. And I also am recommending that you put something in here, ground coordinates. To identify this isn't the NAD 83, maybe OH83 South. This is an edited coordinate zone. So given it a new name, and I've told it in the description, this is ground coordinates based off of that NAD 83. All right, so there's the projection system. I'm going to change this to the Lambert formal conic with an affine processor. There's Bentley documentation for all this stuff. This is what allows me to define scale factor parameters. So I don't have the correct scale factor for this project and make something up. So it's defined in 2 of the parameters. And again, I have this documented in that training guide. So the A1 parameter, I give it a value of 1 point. A0, I'm sorry. Thank you. I was definitely there's A1. And the B2 parameter gets the same value. Okay, so there's my scale factor, and that's probably totally wrong. That's totally wrong because I just made it up. All right, so I've now edited that, and I hit OK, and it's going to tell me, am I correcting the system, or am I reprojecting? So you get the option to tell it right there. That, oh, in this case, I'm going to say I'm reprojecting. It was on the south zone. We're going to project it to this new system. I hit OK and cross my fingers. Did this yesterday, and it blew up on me. So, and then I got in and did it again, and it processed fine. Seems to be a tad flaky. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. The question is, why would I work in ground coordinates? All right. Some of the districts don't. Some of the districts do everything in grid coordinates. Some of the districts still take it to ground. Some of it may be your preference. Brett was here this morning. Brett's not here. Right away. Right away, ground measurements. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and your point is why some of the districts say, smaller project, it's just all on the grid. The difference is so minimal that we're not going to worry about it. On a larger project, it can become a factor there. Now, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in geographic coordinate systems. A lot of this was a lot of learning for me, a lot of talking to Bentley about what tools are available to do this and stuff. So some of the why behind it, I'm facilitating the ability. So the why is really up to you guys, really. And if I were scoping a survey, I'd say give it to me on the grid, give me the scale factor, and that way I can do whatever I want with it. So if I have a client that says I want ground coordinates, once I've made that custom GCS, and it did move for me. So if I go to my library and I copied in the Ohio to favorites, so I don't have to navigate through it. So which one? I'm on the ground right now. If I pick the grid and say OK, say reproject, we should see it move. It just moved for me just now, and then I did that yesterday. Okay, and part of this is, I said earlier, this is not a requirement. It's something that we're looking into, recommending you look into, and I'm going to pour it out here. So, yeah, another question? Yes. Yes, you can use the inverse factor to go back to grid if everything's on ground. And we had, I think, some data in District 7 that had been surveyed a few years ago, and it was on the ground. And we're bringing in some new data that was on the grid. So we made a ground, a ground factor, and said this is where it's at. It's on ground, and then brought in the grid data, and it lined right up. Yeah, and I've had people ask questions about that. What if it goes across north to south? You've got to pick one or the other that you're working in. You can't work in both. I've had some people ask, well, what if it's a really long project and I have different scale factors for different parts of the project? Then you're going to have to break that up into separate design files and assign a scale factor for each one. And then when you reference them together, you're going to have to pick which one am I currently displaying it on. So there's definitely a lot of questions and issues here. The biggest thing is to start to get people exposed to the idea. The biggest thing it gives you is once you establish the position, you can line it up with anything. Now, I've had a couple hiccups here, and Bentley's got to get a couple of those hiccups resolved. But once I establish the position, if I need to send it to Google Earth, it's on the ground. I can't really do that real well. But if it's on the ground and I give it that scale factor and I send it up to Google Earth, they can integrate with each other. They know how these two systems relate to each other. All the OSIP imagery is on the grid. So I've got that stuff with some ground survey. If I make that scale factor, I can integrate them together. So that's really the idea behind it. All right, let's leave it at that. I got 25 after. I haven't even talked about design. This survey. Let me do this. All right, we had the guy with the headache. All right. So let's talk about civil for a few minutes, and we'll leave it at that. Like the survey stuff, the civil design tools are in Task Manager, use Project Explorer. They have the same type of context-sensitive toolbars and in-place editing. When I pick something, editing pops up right there. I'm not going to a separate dialog like that with the heads-up prompts. So some interface enhancements. The feature management. So we talked about features with survey and use of DGN library. So it's a very similar concept. You have features for design. They're defined in a DGN library. And features are a little different for design because features define multiple contexts in design. So a feature can say, this is how this appears in the plan view. And it can have a different display in the profile view, or the cross sections, or 3D, or a projected profile, or a projected cross section. So a feature can define an item's display uniquely for different contexts. The features themselves can be defined by the ODOT Design Computation Manager or by a MicroStation element template. So that that may not make sense to you at this point, but that's all kind of the behind-the-scenes setup stuff, the stuff that I'm preparing that ODOT's going to provide for your use. Okay, so I mentioned horizontal and vertical geometry tools for OpenRoads. The horizontal tools are in SS2. There was no vertical. Now there's vertical tools. They're all graphical-based tools. They're not a comprehensive replacement for Geopack Koga. I did survey training, and we talked a little bit. The surveyors started looking at those tools, and they're like, how do I inverse between 2 points? How do I do all these Koga functions I used to do? a lot of those functions are still unprogrammed for OpenRoads. OpenRoads is really aimed at getting in that alignment and profile and working on the model. It doesn't have robust COGO tools for everything you would do in COGO. And it's still aimed at just generating the corridor. I can send that alignment over to COGO if I need to do GeoPack COGO tools on it. All the graphics for my center lines are stored in a design file, not in a GPK. They can be exported manually or they can be automatically exported depending on the feature, but they are by default just in the design file, depending on the feature you use. So because of this, and I mentioned earlier in the CAD manual, it only specifies 3 base maps are required, one for existing, one for proposed, one for right-of-way. All the other base maps that are listed in there, like for drainage items, for traffic signals, for whatever, maintenance of traffic, maintenance of traffic you probably want to do separate, but those base maps are optional. So we're going to recommend that the geometry itself is stored in its own file. So there will be a base map added for purpose of geometry. Now, on a large project, you may not want all the geometry in one file. You may have a file that has the geometry for one interchange and another file that has the geometry for the interstate, So that stuff can be segregated, or federated was the buzzword at the Bentley conference this year. So that stuff can be federated however you would like. But we are going to recommend a geometry base map and import and export to and from the GPK. And at this point, the GPK and DDB are still used for centerline stationing. So in order to do stationing, I'm going to have to send it to the GPK, and the DDB is used for stationing. Eventually, stationing will be an OpenRoads function, and it won't be the DDB. I mentioned profiles are different. The profiles are extracted from a single terrain model, and they're displayed in a view. They're edited in a view. And when I close the view, I no longer see them. They're still in the file. So it's a lot different, the way profiles are initially extracted and designed. And then this data is shared through reference attachment. There's a new AccuDraw, civil AccuDraw. It's been in the software for a while, but really wasn't any need for it. And as you move forward, it is something that you will want to get familiar with. I know to a lot of designers in ODOT, AccuDraw is a dirty word. A lot of people don't like it, don't use it. And then there's other people that love it. Civil AccuDraw is tailored specifically for the civil environment, does civil functions like station, offset elevation stuff. So civil AccuDraw is something you will want to learn. I'll leave it at that. New super elevation tools. It does use the GeoPack preference files for computation, so the super elevation was more or less ported from GeoPack to an OpenRoads environment. It changes in how it's generated and how you work with it, but the calculation and stuff's pretty much the same. It doesn't actually draw the shapes in the file in the same way. It's a little different. And there's a new super elevation editor to go with that, and there's the ability to import super elevation from a text file, define it that way. And then BGN-based 3D modeling. So I didn't ask this earlier. I meant to ask, how many people have used Roadway Designer? Okay, Roadway Designer is a standalone process. Access it from MicroStation, but it is a separate program, not a MicroStation file. So with OpenRoads, it moves that modeling directly into MicroStation. It's not a separate program with the 3 ports. Roadway Designer, Behavior. So it's based on the design file itself. It integrates a corridor and a site-based work. So I mentioned GeoPack site, taken out of SS3. A lot of those site functions have migrated into OpenRoads. I'm not a site expert, but So OpenRoads not only is aimed at pushing a template along a corridor, but I can pick a single graphic and say, apply this template to this graphic, and it'll run it across a graphic. Similar to some of the site type stuff. So yeah, templates can be applied to individual elements. You will work in 2D. 3D model is managed for you. So you're not actually working directly in 3D when you're laying out alignments and stuff. So that processes that for you. There's a new cross-section process as a result of this. So we're not using criteria files. We're cutting cross-sections from the 3D model. Anything that I can draw in that 3D model is going to show up in the cross-section. Anything. So for example, I ran some cross-sections yesterday. I had my survey data referenced, I had my corridor referenced, and I cut sections. And I'm seeing all these little lines show up in my cross-section. Kevin's laughing at me. And I'm like, what? And I floated my cursor over it, and it's like, oh, that was a piece of text in the survey that it came across, and that text was this long, and it was flat from a 3D perspective. So it drew a line where it intersected that piece of text. So anything it finds in the 3D model that's referenced in there, it's going to draw something in the cross-section. So there's a new cross-section tool that will extract sections. It can do it in sheet mode. It can also, someone asked about putting a geopack cell on it. It can do that if you want. And then since it's extracting graphics by reading the model, there's no annotation, right? Criteria was nice that you could label things in the criteria file. When I cut sections off of a model, there's no annotation. So there's new tools to annotate the sections that you'll need to learn eventually. Civil cells, I'm just going to mention. I have not developed any of these yet other than playing around with it a little bit. But civil cell is a new feature, and it's going to be a really usable feature, I think, in the future. But it's a reusable civil attribute, such as a driveway or an intersection or whatever. And a civil cell, so if I have a standard driveway with a 20-foot radius or something, just on a tangent, I can make a civil cell for that. I can go in there and assign templates to the radius returns for it and things like that, and just drop it in, and it just generates the 3D graphics on the fly as soon as I drop it in. That's a real brief overview of what a civil cell is. They're stored in DGN libraries based on design standards. They are editable when placed, so I mentioned if I made a civil cell for a driveway with a 20-foot radius, when I place it, that radius can be changed to a different value. It's tangent, it doesn't have to be perpendicular. I can pick an alignment it's laying it on and whatnot. And it can include horizontal, also vertical and terrain elements and things like that. So what I envision as far as civil cells is I don't envision myself sitting here and making a bunch of civil cells. I envision different people around ODOT as they're designing projects. I would like to teach them how to make civil cells. They contribute to a library that we can build up to get a robust library. So that's where I'm hoping that will go. And I was going to do some demonstration of the road tools, but kind of running out of time here a little bit. So what do I need to get started? Some of you guys have looked at this stuff already, and some of you guys have probably seen it for the first time today. You need CADD standards, all right? Survey standards are out there. They were published in April. They'll all be kind of integrated into one SS3 ODOT CADD setup this fall. Design standards, I'm hoping that, or I will be putting design standards out this fall, and guys can start looking at those and start tearing them apart and telling us what we need to enhance and update on those. Bentley does deliver a set of standards with OpenRoads in the examples workspace. It's pretty robust. It's a good thing to look at and get started with their examples workspace as far as just learning some things if you're really interested in getting started. Some things you can do now. Scope survey sub-consultants to deliver OpenRoads compatible data. Well, ideally, yes, but you at least, I'm going to say you probably want to scope them to deliver data on state plane grid and give you the scale factor. But at least you've got the tools that you need to enable that grid-to-ground geographic coordinate system to a future date. You know, you guys know this already. Request the ODOT field codes and mapping codes, and you may request it and not get it. And I've heard all kinds of stories about survey problems. And the thing that is kind of nice in the current OpenRoads development is you can always export that stuff to a GPK in 10. Use your GeoPack tools. If you're trying to do something with OpenRoads and taking you longer than expected with the learning curve, get into a bind, you can always jump back to GeoPack and wrap some things up there. If you're not familiar with working in 3D, I'd say go ahead and start familiarizing yourself with 3D. Even though you work in 2D as far as plan and profile and stuff, and it makes a 3D model for you, you're probably going to find that there'll be cases where you need to add things to that 3D model manually. If you're not familiar with 3D, I would start more familiar with MicroStation in 3D. I'm not what I consider a 3D expert by any means. If you're using Railway Designer and making templates, you've got a leg up already because OpenRoads templates are basically Railway Designer templates. You've got an inroads background, you've got a leg up there because that stuff all came from inroads. So if you're not familiar with templates and you've got some time to look at them, there is an ODOT template library in the standards that you can bring up in SS2 and training stuff for Railway Designer on the ODOT website you can look at. Probably a couple of videos I did 4 years ago or so, template stuff in there. Experiment with OpenRoads horizontal and vertical tools. Go ahead and start looking at them. Look at what's there. Start playing with them. Get familiar with them. Learn Civil AccuDraw. Okay? If you don't use AccuDraw currently, familiarize yourself with AccuDraw first and look at some of the civil functions. Another thing that you could do is there's that ODOT communities that Mark had earlier on the Bentley website, BE communities. It's free, it's accessible to anyone. You don't have to have a Bentley Select license or a Bentley Learn license to get into communities. There's an ODOT and consultants community that's set up there. It doesn't get a lot of traffic or a lot of questions now, excuse me, now, but it's something that it's just another tool for communication. I know Mark and I have ours set up that if someone posts something, I get notified that there's a new post in it. That's a potential place for sharing information, asking questions like that. So at that, I'm going to wrap it up and turn it back over to Mark. I am under contract with ODOT, so I still have ODOT email address. It's really kind of funny when they brought me back in. They never deleted anything. So they just reactivated the account. And it was like I never left. I'm like, if I like this, it's kind of scary. So it's the same email address it was, and I'm a consultant. I am my own little LLC. And I will just mention that contact me there if you want to for something not specifically related to ODOT. Mark?
Anybody have any questions for Eric?
Go ahead. Yeah. Okay, so questions related to drainage and how I see that going forward. StormCAD, there was an ODOT employee here that Dan's company stole and laughed at, that had developed the StormCAD standards, and right now that's currently unsupported by ODOT. So here's the initial StormCAD standards. Where's it going? SUDA is where it's going, the subsurface utility design and analysis. That's going to get you the more interactive graphic type thing, so your design and analysis and the graphics all in one is where they're going with SUDA. SUDA is an unreleased product at this point, so until it appears, that's all, it's vaporware at this point, I guess. You probably are running it.
anybody using the ODOT VBAs for drainage? Okay, we're not sure where that's going to go with SUE or SUDA, so as we develop those cell libraries in SUE, those will probably just go away at some point once we move forward with this 3D stuff.
Okay. Yeah. Some things are dynamic and some things are not at this point. So at this point, cross-sections are extracted from corridor model, and the cross-section is just a cross-section graphic. So if I update the corridor, the graphic is just sitting there. Not incorrect, I'm correct. So I believe their intent is for it to be dynamic at some point. It's not dynamic at this point as far as cross-sections with the
Probably not at this point. It might eventually get there where we're going to be showing something different, but I think initially it's just going to be what we've already set up for Roadway Designer as far as the templates go. That may change long term with our implementation for OpenRoads. For a plan set at this point, probably not.
I'm opening a cross-section file that's extracted from the model, and it's just, I dumped them out there with a GeoPack cell, so it's not in a sheet format. And it's just literally what it sees in the model. And that subgrade line is, I did not have that defined at this point. So at this point, it's just the layers and cells as line strings. Another thing, I didn't square off the ends in the templates. There's good. You think that's going to happen?
Stuff. You might want to ask Kevin on that one. Going to want that squared off if they want subsurface? No?
We had criteria just comes out here at the furthest point and goes straight up to intersect. What the ODOT criteria did. You're not getting that right now. And at this point, it's not annotated, like I say. Each little point has a little piece of text that's tagged with data, and the annotation kind of goes through and say, well, from this one and, this one over here, I want you annotated as a rise run. And it just goes through each section and finds those points and just, make a little library of point names that it uses to annotate scroll throughs. Haven't got to figuring that. Tested it at one point. Getting set up for that yet. Question? Go ahead.
Are you printing to PDF or TIFF or PDF? That's a Jack question. Yeah, if you have something, just send it to us. Yeah, that's fine. We're going to be doing some configuration files for the PDF stuff anyways, probably I don't know if, probably the next release, maybe preliminary config files for PDF. We're taking the approach right now, we're going to continue to support Select Series 2. We realize that this is a fairly new technology. Bentley, this, I think, is the third refresh that they've done. Is that correct? Second refresh?
I think this will be the third when it comes out.
Yeah, they're getting ready to do another refresh. They told us 2 weeks ago, and we have yet to see it. But that's one thing. We want to try to get our hands on that to kind of, move forward, check some of the features, because I know there's still some quirks, obviously, with it. We're taking the approach that we want to try to move forward at ODOT with the new software and the new technology, but we realize that some consultants may be a little hesitant. So Select Series 2 will continue to support. As far as enhancements go, we're probably not going to be doing too much. It'll be more of a support role at that point. Select Series 3 obviously will be, moving forward with implementing new tools and things like that, possibly VBAs, depending on, our staffing and stuff like that. But from a standpoint, long term, I would say probably within the next, 2 years, SS3 or SS2 at one point will just probably stop supporting, and it'll, you'll have to be forward into open it. 2 years anyway. I'll let Eric answer.
Is ODOT going to standardize the point names for templates? Let me see. I gave that a lot of thought. And I talked to several consultants using Roadway Designer. I think, Kevin, you guys you have a standard at HMTV that, Larry's got something. I looked at it, and it just seemed like, maybe you two guys send me what you got. Can you do that? And I'll look at it. I was going to open the templates, and I'm right spot here. Well, okay, my intent with this library is I've gone through, we put out one for Roadway Designer 4 years ago-ish, 4.5 years ago, and we did not publish a naming convention for the points. I just used what seemed reasonable to me. And I tried to make it consistent from template to template so that these things would actually connect. Because in talking to some contractors, we found they're very interested in 3D line strings of the data. So having these things connect, and in SS3 with OpenRoads with the template, having a feature definition that's assigned to them. I don't think that was there in Roadway Designer. Feature definition on a point. So I've gone back through this, and I still need to go through it again because it's so easy to miss one. And I've kind of tried to unify the point names, from template to template so they're the same, and the feature that's assigned to each point, I've tried to make sure that's consistent from template. And then one of the things I had done is I had made an assumption, which is never a good thing to do, but I'd made an assumption that people were interested in the surface, not so much the pavement layers. And as we talked to some construction contractors, they said, anything you can give us is a benefit. So if I can get 3D line strings of these bottom of each layer, that'd be great. Well, what I've done at this point is they're kind of, maybe I did, some of these were kind of generic. They weren't defined uniquely, so they all went to the same level, and I'm finding that I need to break them all up. So that's not exactly, I went off on a tangent on what you asked. So I don't have a recommended point naming convention. The intention is if you use an ODOT template and modify it, that they'll all connect properly. If there's a need for a naming convention, what's your experience with conventions for Are you the only one creating templates, I guess, at this point, or you've got other guys doing it too? Are they following it? It seems pretty cumbersome. Okay. I'm not opposed to it at all. I didn't know if people would use it. Yeah. And what I've done this is just there's just an ODOT templates, and it's just got some generic things. Some of it, it's not going to meet every need, just like criteria didn't meet every need. But when I create a project, I'm taking that ODOT template library, putting it in the Geopack folder for the project, renaming it with the PIN number for the project, so it's sitting there and the configuration variable is pointing to it and it's ready to be used. So that's what I've done from the project configuration side for ODOT. Whether a consultant uses that or not is another thing. So it's a starting point, the way I view it. And you've probably, if you've got a robust library that you've already developed, and you want to use it. If ODOT publishes names for points and you don't follow it, I don't think anyone really care on that. Especially if you've already got a robust library of some templates. Editing those things, going through everyone, getting everyone correct is a lot of work. It is an XML file, and you can open it with an editor and edit it in a text mode. You've got to be careful, but it is an XML file. So you can do find and replace type stuff, but it's still tricky. You can split it up however you want. And I mentioned earlier, federated was a buzzword at the Bentley conference. Every presentation I went to, they talked about federated. I'm thinking the United Federation of Planets. I'm a Star Trek fan. But it's, you've got all these things, and they're all affiliated. So, like, I've got a KM, which is a new, there isn't a KM in the ODOT standards. Geopack, everything that was Geopack related had a K and an M for modeling. So I have a KM base map here, and I've got a 1 and a 2, and my intent was to lay out an alignment and throw in a template and do the side road, and obviously that's not going to happen. But I did split them out. So there's a corridor model for mainline, there's a separate file for the side road. And the answer from Bentley when that question was asked was always, do what makes sense for your project. If it's a really small project and it makes sense to put everything in one file, that's fine. If it makes sense to split things out, then you reference them and you have immediate access. So like there's a KS was a Geopack shapes, and I mentioned shapes are handled differently. But I put the super elevation for the main line in its own file. And then when I open the corridor file, I reference, and the center line's in its own file. So that is in a, there we go. So there's my center line proposed state route 185. It's in, I mentioned that you're going to want to use a separate base map for geometry, so we're putting that for now under GeoPack base maps. Put a new folder, that may change. And it's a BK file. Base map, A was always GeoPack stuff, B for a base map. So that's in one file. The super elevation definition is in this file itself, and then I think this side road alignment is probably in that one there. Yeah, that's actually in a BK002, so I actually put it in a separate. You split them up however you want, reference them and access to them. I probably have a profile defined for at least the main line here. Just like elevation, got a gnat up here. Probably need to open that file. While I'm opening that, we can take another question. Sure. Oh, okay. That is what you asked, isn't it? All the templates are in one library. And it can be, you can put, I don't see a need for a separate template library for different alignments. Have you run into cases where you've wanted separate? You have. What was your case? Okay. You can copy templates from one library to another. There's facilities in there to do that.
Specific template libraries. You guys do that, Kevin? Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't enabled a project-specific template library, but it's just copying the ODOT one into the project folder, and it's just the one there.
That's part of the PCF config.
Yeah, the bad thing about the way it's configured is that currently the default library is defined by a configuration variable. So it can only point to one file. So you've got to work around that, which can be a pain. More questions?
Anything else? Anything for Jack? No love.
All right, just give me another minute here, just because I was going to do it. Select this and go to a profile view, and I'll tell it. Let's show that in view 2. So when you're designing and working with your profile, it's in a view. It's not actually really same as it. It's stored in the file, but it's not really written to a file with the profile cell and stuff like that. It's just associated with that alignment. So when I cut that ground profile, it was cut against the existing terrain model, and I had to pick that one terrain model to cut across. And then there's a group of tools for laying out the vertical geometry. And then once I got that stuff defined, if I look at its properties, I've given it a name, and then I've exported that to the GPK. So it does reside in the GPK, and I'd have to plot it in a profile, in a design file with Design Computation Manager in order to cut sheets. So you can't, this point in the software, you can't cut sheets against this profile. It's not annotated with any slopes or anything. It's just kind of sitting out there in space. But when I pick it, there is, different pop-up. Like it's a 700-foot vertical curve. I can click on that there, change the length, 600. Update. So now it's a 600-foot vertical curve. Example of some of the in-place editing civil features there. Thought I'd throw that out there.
Anything else for any of us up here? Okay. Just in closing, thank you for attending. Like I said before, this is something we want to start up again. If you've gotten the OTEC brochure, we're actually going to be doing a whole track for CAD mapping services at OTEC. Derek Gray from Bentley is going to present. He's actually going to talk about OpenRoads again, and then some of the pseudo stuff that Bentley's working on. We did record the sessions for today. Excuse me. They're going to be posted on our website, so if you need to refer back to something, they'll be available. These in the back, if you didn't get an agenda that you want to take with you that has the CPD credit at the bottom, see her on your way out. Other than that, thank you very much.